The old recording device hummed softly as Ashitar pressed his scaled finger against the activation switch. His three eyes focused on the small machine while his memories drifted back to those impossible days when everything changed. The medical bay around him smelled of antiseptic and metal, but his mind filled with the scent of burning plasma and human sweat. Personal log, Cycle 847 post-war, he spoke in his native tongue, then switched to the crude human language he had learned. This is former Coalition Commander Ashitar. I record these memories for the archives, though I doubt anyone will believe them. 3 years had passed since the Void Swarm War ended. 3 years since he first saw humans fight. The images still burned in his mind like fresh wounds. Back then, he thought he understood warfare. The Coalition had rules, tactics, proper procedures. Soldiers were numbers on a screen. Acceptable losses were calculated before each mission. Everything made sense. Then came the humans. Ashtar remembered his first briefing about Earth's newest species. The data showed a young race with primitive technology and emotional decision-making. Their ships used kinetic weapons instead of energy beams. Their armor was thick metal instead of energy shields. Military analysts predicted they would last maybe 6 months against the swarm. The Coalition needed bodies for the meat grinder. Humans had plenty of bodies. His first assignment was simple. Evaluate human combat effectiveness on Tertius 7, a mining world under swarm attack. Standard evacuation protocol called for saving critical personnel and abandoning the rest. Clean, efficient, logical. The human ship arrived 3 hours after the swarm landing. Ashtar watched from his command vessel as crude human dropships descended through plasma fire. No shields, just thick armor and pilot skill. Several ships took direct hits but kept flying. Coalition pilots would have ejected. Human pilots flew burning ships to the ground and crawled out shooting. Captain Reed led the human ground forces, a female with short brown hair and scars across her left cheek. She spoke with other humans in quick, harsh sentences that their translators barely caught. Her first words to Ashtar were unforgettable. "Where are the civilians?" Ashtar had explained the situation. Tertius 7 housed 50,000 miners and their families. The evacuation ships could carry 12,000. Coalition doctrine was clear. Save the skilled workers, abandon the rest, deny the planet to the swarm with orbital bombardment. Reed stared at him with those strange blue human eyes. All of them. We save all of them. Impossible, Ashitar had replied. The numbers do not work. Acceptable losses are calculated at 76%. Then we change the numbers. What followed broke every rule Ashitar knew about warfare. Reed split her forces into dozens of small teams. They scattered across the mining complex, turning industrial equipment into weapons. Ore haulers became mobile fortresses. Mining lasers became anti-aircraft guns. Civilian transports were armored with metal plates and used as evacuation vehicles. Human medic Anna set up a field hospital in the main mining facility. When swarm bioships broke through the perimeter, she refused to move. Instead, her squad built defensive positions around her using ore processors and conveyor belts. They turned a medical station into a fortress. Ashitar watched through his scopes as Anna performed surgery on a wounded miner, while plasma fire lit up the sky above her. Her hands never shook. When a swarm warrior broke through the makeshift walls, she killed it with a surgical laser without looking up from her patient. The human engineer Paul worked miracles with simple tools. He rigged explosive charges from mining equipment and created a network of booby traps throughout the complex. When swarm forces tried to advance through the tunnels, they walked into carefully planned explosions that brought down tons of rock. But it was the children that changed everything for Ashitar. Coalition protocol said civilians should stay hidden during combat operations. Human civilians helped fight. Children as young as 10 years carried ammunition and medical supplies. Teenagers operated communication equipment and guided evacuation efforts. A girl named Beth, maybe 12 years old, saved Ashitar's life. She spotted a swarm infiltrator before his sensors did, and warned him with a thrown rock to his helmet. When he asked why she helped an alien soldier, she said, "You're trying to save us. That makes you family. Family." The humans used that word for everyone who fought beside them. The battle lasted 18 hours. Every minute, Ashitar expected the human lines to break. They were outnumbered 5-1. Their weapons were inferior. Their tactics made no sense. They should have died in the first hour. Instead, they won. When the last swarm bioship fell burning from the sky, Ashtar counted casualties. Coalition projections showed 38,000 dead civilians and 2,000 dead soldiers. Actual numbers: 847 dead civilians, 23 dead soldiers. The humans had somehow saved 49,153 people who should have died. Captain Reed found him staring at the numbers. Her armor was scorched and her left arm hung in a makeshift sling, but she was smiling. "How?" was all Ashitar could ask. "We don't leave people behind," she said. "Ever." That night, Ashitar filed his report. He recommended immediate integration of human forces into coalition operations. His superiors thought he had suffered combat trauma. No species could achieve those results with such primitive methods. But Ashitar had seen the truth. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't calculate acceptable losses or follow proper procedures. They fought like every life mattered. They fought like family. The recording device beeped softly, indicating low power. Ashtar reached out to switch it off, then paused. There was so much more to tell. The impossible offensive at Breakwater Station, the guerrilla campaign on Haven 2, the hybrid squadrons that changed everything. "End log," he said finally. "More to follow." As the device powered down, Ashitar gazed out the medical bay window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, human ships were exploring former swarm worlds. They would build colonies, establish trade routes, create new homes for refugees from a dozen species. They would do it all because of that simple human belief: no one gets left behind. Pain shot through Ashitar's damaged left leg as he adjusted his position in the medical chair. The prosthetic never quite felt right, especially when the weather changed aboard the ship. He activated the recording device again, its soft blue glow reflecting off his scales. "Personal log, Cycle 847 post-war, Entry 2, he began. "Today I remember Breakwater Station, and the day humans taught the galaxy that impossible is just another word for difficult." Ashitar closed his three eyes and let the memories flow. Breakwater Station had been the Coalition's primary supply depot for the entire sector. Massive storage facilities, fuel refineries, and repair docks stretched across 3 interconnected platforms in deep space. When the swarm surrounded it with a fleet of bioships, Coalition High Command wrote it off immediately. The numbers were simple. 12,000 personnel trapped on the station. 300 swarm vessels forming a blockade. Coalition rescue forces numbered barely 50 ships with limited firepower. Standard doctrine demanded retreat and resource preservation. General Hayes disagreed. The human commander arrived at the emergency briefing wearing a simple gray uniform covered in coffee stains. His gray hair stuck up at odd angles, and his tired eyes held a stubborn light that made other Coalition officers uncomfortable. When Admiral Kest announced the station's abandonment, Hayes stood up slowly. "We're not leaving them," he said in that flat human way that somehow carried more authority than shouting. Admiral Kest, a proud Centaurian with ceremonial battle scars, bristled at the challenge. "General Hayes, the tactical situation is clear. Breakwater cannot be saved. We must preserve our remaining forces for strategic positions." "Watch us," Hayes replied. What followed was the most insane military briefing Ashitar ever attended. Hayes spread holographic displays across the conference table, showing ship positions and supply routes. His plan violated every principle of space combat doctrine. "Frontal assault," he announced. "We hit them hard and fast with everything we have." "Suicide," muttered Commander Vell from the Draxian delegation. "Kinetic bombardment," Hayes continued, ignoring the interruption. "We strip the cargo haulers of their freight and load them with metal slugs. Turn civilian ships into mass drivers." Ashtar found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. "The cargo vessels have no armor, no shields. They will be destroyed before reaching effective range." Hayes smiled, and Ashitar learned to fear that human expression. "That's why we're not stopping to fight. Full burn straight through their formation. One shot each, then scatter." The plan was madness. Cargo ships were not warships. Their crews were civilian volunteers with basic training. The swarm would vaporize them before they could fire a single shot. "I volunteer my ship," Hayes said quietly. "My crew knows the risks. We're going in first." That changed everything. Other human captains began volunteering. Then Coalition officers started speaking up. Within an hour, Hayes had assembled a fleet of 47 vessels, mostly civilian craft with improvised weapons. Ashtar found himself assigned as tactical advisor aboard Hayes's flagship. a converted freighter called Persistence. The human crew treated him with casual friendliness that felt wrong during a suicide mission. Engineer Lisa showed him around the ship while installing additional kinetic launchers. "Never seen anything like this," she admitted, welding support struts to the cargo bay walls. "We're basically turning the whole ship into a giant shotgun." The pilot, an elderly human named Frank, spent his time programming flight paths on outdated navigation equipment. 40 years hauling freight," he told Ashitar. "Never thought I'd die in combat. Always figured it would be engine failure or bad food." "You do not have to do this," Ashitar said. "Your government did not order this mission." Frank shrugged. "General didn't order us either. We volunteered. Those people on breakwater need help, so we helped them. Simple as that, simple." Humans made everything sound simple. The attack began at Narno 300 ship time. Hayes's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at maximum velocity, already burning toward the swarm blockade. No formation flying, no complex maneuvers. Just a ragged line of converted civilian ships charging into certain death. Ashtar watched the tactical display as swarm bioships moved to intercept. Plasma cannons opened fire at extreme range, filling space with deadly energy. The first human ship died before firing a shot. Then the second. Then the third. "Steady as she goes," Hayes said calmly as plasma bursts rocked their ship. Engineer Lisa's voice crackled over the intercom. "Kinetic launcher ready. We get one shot at this." "Make it count," Hayes replied. The Persistence shuddered as enemy fire stripped away hull plating. Ashtar felt the deck tilt as gravity generators failed. Through the viewports, he could see other human ships dying in brilliant flashes of light. More than half the fleet was already gone. Then they reached firing range. "All ships engage targets," Hayes commanded. The improvised mass drivers spoke with one voice. Tons of metal slugs, accelerated to incredible velocity, tore through the swarm formation. Bioships designed to absorb energy weapons had no defense against simple kinetic impact. Hulls ruptured. Organic systems failed. 23 swarm vessels died in the first volley, but the human ships were dying too. The Persistence lost main power as plasma fire gutted her engine room. Frank wrestled with dead controls as they tumbled toward a massive swarm battleship. "Engine room to bridge." Lisa's voice was strained but steady. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before total systems failure." Hayes activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands prepare for collision. Set the remaining kinetic charges for manual detonation." Ashitar realized what Hayes planned to do. "You cannot ram that vessel. Your crew will die." "Maybe," Hayes agreed. "But that battleship coordinates their whole fleet. Take it out and the smaller ships lose tactical cohesion." The Persistence struck the swarm battleship at full velocity. Ashtar felt his bones crack as inertia threw him against his restraints. Metal screamed. Bulkheads buckled. The ship's hull split open like ripe fruit. Emergency lights flickered as Hayes crawled to the manual detonation controls. Blood ran down his face from a head wound, but his hands were steady. "Lisa, you still with us?" "Still here, General." "Charges are armed, good girl. Been an honor serving with you." Hayes triggered the kinetic charges. The explosion tore through both ships, reducing the massive swarm battleship to scattered debris. In the tactical display, Ashitar watched as the remaining bioships began to scatter without central coordination. The surviving human ships pressed their attack. Pilot Vera guided her damaged fighter toward another capital ship, her engines trailing fire. At the last second, she ejected while her ship's artificial intelligence completed the suicide run. More explosions lit up space as other human crews made similar sacrifices. When the battle ended, Breakwater Station was free. The human fleet was almost completely destroyed, but they had broken a swarm blockade that should have been impossible to breach. Rescue ships evacuated all 12,000 station personnel. Ashitar survived because Hayes had shoved him into an escape pod before the final explosion. He was rescued 18 hours later by a coalition medical ship. The first thing he asked about was human casualties. The numbers were devastating. 38 ships destroyed, over 300 human crew members dead. But they had saved 12,000 lives and dealt the swarm its first major tactical defeat. At the memorial service, Ashitar stood beside the families of the dead crew members. He expected anger, grief, blame for the military leadership that sent their loved ones on a suicide mission. Instead, he found quiet pride. Frank's widow shook Ashitar's hand with tears in her eyes. He always said the most important cargo was the people waiting at the other end, she told him. I'm glad he got to deliver one last load. Ashitar turned off the recording device and stared at his reflection in the dark viewport. In the distance, running lights marked the position of a human hospital ship, treating wounded veterans from 6 different species. They had learned something from Hayes and his crew. Sometimes the impossible was just another word for necessary, and sometimes simple, stubborn courage was worth more than all the tactical doctrine in the galaxy. The storm outside rattled the medical ship's hull as Ashitar reached for his pain medication. His wounds from Haven 2 still ached when atmospheric pressure changed. 3 years later, and his body still remembered that cursed moon, he swallowed the pills and activated his recording device once more. Personal log, Cycle 847 post-war, Entry 3. Today I recall Haven 2, where humans turned defeat into victory and taught the galaxy that environment is just another weapon. Haven 2 looked beautiful from orbit. A forest moon with purple trees and silver streams, orbiting a gas giant that painted the sky in shades of gold. The swarm had landed there first, establishing a breeding facility in the northern continent. Coalition forces tried 3 times to dislodge them and failed each time. The humans arrived after the 3rd defeat. Not as reinforcements, but as refugees. Their transport ships were damaged, leaking fuel and life support. Most military commanders would have continued to the nearest safe system. The human commander, Colonel West, ordered his ships to land in Haven 2's southern forests. We're making a stand here, he announced over the emergency comm channels. Ashtar was part of the coalition evaluation. Teams sent to document the human effort. Nobody expected them to last more than a few days. The swarm controlled the orbital space, the major population centers, and most of the moon's industrial facilities. 2,000 scattered human soldiers with limited supplies and no air support faced 30,000 swarm warriors. The math was simple. The humans would die quickly. The humans disagreed with the math. Sergeant Blake led the unit Ashitar was assigned to observe. A tall woman with calloused hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She studied the forest like she was reading a book written in an alien language. These purple trees, she told her squad during their first patrol. Sap is highly flammable. Bark contains alkaloids that mess with nervous systems. Seeds explode when heated. Her demolitions expert, a young man named Rick, grinned as he collected samples. So we're basically camping in a munitions factory. Exactly. That first week, Ashitar watched the humans transform the forest into a death trap. They didn't fight like regular soldiers. They fought like the forest itself was their ally. Explosive tree seeds became grenades. Toxic plant sap poisoned swarm water supplies. Tangled vines were woven into camouflage that made human positions invisible. Diana, the unit's supply specialist, established hidden caches throughout the forest using techniques her grandfather had taught her from ancient Earth survival manuals. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, and weapons were buried in waterproof containers and marked with symbols only the humans understood. My family survived 3 wars on Earth by knowing how to hide resources, she explained while burying another cache. Government falls, armies retreat, cities burn. But if you know where to look, you can always find what you need to keep fighting. The swarm sent hunting parties into the forest. They never came back. Not all of them anyway. The humans would leave 1 or 2 survivors, wounded but alive, to carry messages back to the main force. The messages were always simple. Surrender now or join your dead. Psychological warfare. That's what the textbooks called it. But this was different. The humans weren't trying to break swarm morale. They were breaking the hive mind itself. Ben, the unit's tactics officer, studied captured swarm communications equipment with intense focus. They share thoughts through bioelectrical signals, he explained to Ashitar. Like a biological internet. But that means they're vulnerable to feedback loops. Explain. If you can create enough pain and confusion in individual units, it cascades through the network. Like a computer virus, but for living minds. The humans began leaving wounded swarm warriors alive with crude medical treatment, not enough to save them, but enough to prolong their suffering. The injured creatures sent distress signals through the hive mind, creating interference that disrupted swarm coordination across the entire moon. Ashitar watched this strategy with growing horror. This is torture. This is war, Blake replied coldly. They came here to breed soldiers for killing civilian populations. We're giving them something to think about instead. The tactics worked. Swarm ground forces became hesitant, confused. Their attacks lacked coordination. Some units retreated from positions they could have easily held. The hive mind, designed for efficiency and shared purpose, couldn't process the constant stream of fear and pain from the forest. But it was the native predators that truly turned the tide. Haven 2's forests were home to pack hunters called shadow cats. They were invisible in the purple undergrowth, moved without sound, and had an appetite for anything that smelled like fear. The swarm, with their bioelectrical nervous systems, apparently smelled like a feast. Blake's squad learned to work with the shadow cats instead of against them. They would wound swarm patrols, then retreat, leaving blood trails for the native predators to follow. The cats did the rest. "We're not fighting the swarm," Blake explained during one of their planning sessions. "We're introducing them to the local wildlife." The breakthrough came when Diana discovered that certain forest fungi could be processed into a compound that disrupted swarm biotechnology. Human engineers working with equipment salvaged from crashed ships synthesized the compound into aerosol form, organic nerve gas, Rick said cheerfully as he loaded the canisters into improvised delivery systems, made from mushrooms. "Has to be the weirdest weapon in military history." The final assault on the swarm breeding facility used every trick the humans had learned. Explosive seeds brought down defensive barriers. Toxic plant extracts poisoned the air recycling systems. Shadow cats stalked through breached walls while human soldiers appeared and disappeared like ghosts among the purple trees. When the facility fell, Ashitar counted over 5,000 dead swarm warriors. Human casualties numbered 37. But the real victory was psychological. Word of Haven 2 spread through the swarm hive mind across dozens of systems. Entire biofleets began avoiding forested worlds. The creatures that had once seemed unstoppable now feared environments where humans might be hiding. After the battle, Ashitar found Blake sitting beside a stream, cleaning her rifle with steady hands. The forest around them was quiet except for the sound of running water and distant bird calls. "How?" he asked. "How did 2,000 soldiers defeat 30,000? Blake looked up at the golden sky visible through the purple canopy. "We didn't defeat 30,000 soldiers. We defeated the idea that they were unbeatable. Fear spreads through their network faster than courage. Give them enough nightmares and they start losing before the fighting begins." She went back to cleaning her weapon. "Besides, this isn't our first time being outnumbered in hostile territory. My species has been fighting from disadvantage for thousands of years. You learn things." That night, Ashtar filed a report recommending immediate study of human guerrilla tactics. Coalition High Command was skeptical. Using native fauna as weapons violated several treaties. Psychological warfare against hive minds was untested. The methods were too unconventional for standard doctrine, but the results spoke for themselves. Human resistance techniques began appearing in training manuals across the coalition. Other species learned to see their environment as an ally instead of an obstacle. Worlds that should have fallen to the swarm held their ground using tactics learned from those 2,000 refugees in a purple forest. Ashtar turned off the recording device and listened to the storm outside. Thunder rolled across the ship's hull like distant artillery. He thought about Blake and her squad, scattered now across the galaxy. Some had died in later battles. Others had returned to Earth or settled on new colonies, but their lessons lived on. In every forest where coalition soldiers learned to work with nature instead of against it, in every captured enemy who received medical treatment instead of execution, in every battlefield where fear became a weapon more powerful than plasma cannons. The humans had taught the galaxy something important. Sometimes the best way to win a war was to make your enemies afraid of fighting it. The medical bay's lights dimmed automatically as evening cycle began aboard the ship. Ashtar shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the old wounds from Iron Gate pulling tight across his chest. Some scars never healed properly, especially when they came from watching friends die. He pressed the recording button with a shaking hand. Personal log, cycle 847 post-war, entry 4. Tonight I remember Iron Gate, and the human who taught me that healing can be braver than fighting. Iron Gate was a fortress world, built by the Coalition during the early years of the war. Massive defensive installations carved into mountain ranges, underground cities that could shelter millions, orbital weapons platforms that could level continents. It was supposed to be impregnable. The swarm cracked it open in 6 hours. Ashitar arrived with the relief force to find the planet burning. Swarm bioships had breached the orbital defenses and landed assault troops throughout the fortress complexes. Millions of civilians were trapped in the underground cities while swarm warriors hunted them through the tunnels. The Human Medical Corps arrived in unmarked ships, against direct orders from Coalition Command. Their leader was a quiet man named Kyle, who carried more medical equipment than weapons. His team set up field hospitals and active combat zones while the fighting raged around them. This violates every protocol, Ashitar had told Kyle during their first meeting. Medical facilities require secure perimeters and safe evacuation routes. Kyle looked up from the wounded Coalition soldier he was treating. His hands were covered in blue alien blood, but they moved with steady precision. Wounded don't care about protocols. They need help now, not after we win the battle. The Coalition approach to battlefield medicine was pragmatic. Treat injuries with high survival probability. Stabilize critical cases for evacuation to rear areas. Leave the hopeless cases to die with dignity. It was efficient, logical, and designed to preserve medical resources for maximum effect. The humans ignored all of it. Kyle's team established trauma centers in the deepest parts of the fortress complex, where the fighting was heaviest. They operated by lamplight, while plasma bolts lit up the corridors outside. When swarm warriors broke through defensive lines, the medics kept working with one hand while shooting with the other. Ashtar watched human Dr. Rosa perform surgery on a wounded Zentorian while her patients' squad held the operating room against swarm infiltrators. The alien soldier had severe internal bleeding and a 70% chance of death even with immediate treatment. Coalition doctrine said to make him comfortable and focus resources on salvageable cases. Rosa disagreed. She spent 8 hours rebuilding damaged organs while the battle raged around her. When her power failed, she continued by flashlight. When swarm bioacids began eating through the walls, she moved her patient to a supply closet and kept operating. The Zentorian survived. Why? Ashtar asked her afterward. You could have saved 3 others in the time it took to treat him. Rosa cleaned blood from her instruments with methodical care. Maybe. But I wasn't treating 3 others. I was treating him. Right here. Right now. This soldier needed help, so I helped him. The human medical philosophy was simple. Every life had equal value. It didn't matter if the patient was a high-ranking officer or a civilian refugee. Critical cases received the same care as minor injuries. Even enemy wounded were treated if they could be captured alive. Dr. Walsh established the first prisoner medical facility in Coalition history. When swarm warriors were taken alive during the fighting, she treated their injuries and studied their biology. Other officers thought she was wasting resources. Walsh called it an opportunity. Know your enemy, she explained while examining a sedated swarm drone. Understand how they work, how they think, how they feel pain. The more we learn about them, the better we can help our own wounded. Her research led to breakthroughs in treating bioweapon injuries. Swarm acid burns, neural toxins, and organic infections had killed thousands of Coalition soldiers in earlier battles. Walsh developed treatments using captured swarm medical supplies and biological samples. They're not monsters, she told Ashtar while showing him her research data. They're living creatures with the same basic needs as any organism. Food, shelter, reproduction, survival. Understanding that helps us find ways to counter their weapons, but it was during the siege of Section 7 that Ashtar truly understood human medical. Doctrine Section 7 housed 30,000 civilian refugees in underground shelters. When swarm forces breached the main entrance, Kyle's medical team was trapped inside with minimal supplies and no evacuation route. Coalition forces couldn't reach them through the swarm-controlled tunnels. The civilians were dying. Not from enemy action, but from overcrowding, poor sanitation, and limited medical care. Children were getting sick from contaminated water. Elderly refugees were succumbing to stress and exhaustion. Pregnant women were going into labor without proper medical attention. Kyle organized his team into mobile units that moved through the crowded shelters. They treated everything from minor cuts to emergency surgery, using improvised tools and salvaged equipment. When medical supplies ran low, they taught civilian volunteers basic first aid and hygiene protocols. We're not just treating injuries, Kyle explained to his team during one of their brief rest periods. We're keeping hope alive. These people need to know that someone cares about them, that they're not abandoned. The breakthrough came when engineer Tim discovered that the shelter's waste processing system could be modified to create clean water. Kyle's team worked with civilian technicians to implement the modifications. turning a potential disease outbreak into a functioning sanitation system. But the real test came during the final swarm. Assault on Section 7 swarm warriors broke through the secondary barriers and began attacking the refugee areas directly. Kyle was treating a wounded child when a bioweapon explosion brought down part of the ceiling, pinning his left leg under a massive concrete beam. Ashitar reached him first. The leg was badly crushed, probably beyond saving. Standard procedure was to apply a tourniquet and evacuate for amputation. Kyle had other ideas. "Hand me the bone saw," he said calmly. "Kyle, you need proper surgical facilities for amputation." "Not amputating," freeing myself. Kyle's face was pale from blood loss, but his voice remained steady. "That tourniquet won't hold forever. I need to get this leg free so I can keep working." What followed was the most horrifying display of courage Ashitar ever witnessed. Kyle performed field amputation on his own leg, cutting through bone and tissue while guiding Ashitar through the procedure. He stayed conscious through the entire operation, calling out instructions and monitoring his own vital signs. "Clamp that artery. Good. Now cut parallel to the bone. Don't go too deep. Excellent. Just a little more." When it was over, Kyle was fitted with a basic prosthetic from their emergency supplies. He was back on duty within 6 hours, treating wounded refugees while learning to walk on an artificial leg. "Why?" Ashtar asked him. "You could have waited for proper evacuation. Your career as a field medic is over." Kyle looked around the shelter at the families he was treating. Children played in the corridors while their parents worked to maintain the life support systems. Elderly refugees shared stories with young volunteers. Pregnant women rested comfortably in improvised maternity wards. "My career is helping people who need help," Kyle said simply. "The career continues as long as there are people who need help." The final evacuation of Section 7 saved all 30,000 refugees. Not a single civilian died from medical causes during the siege. Kyle's team had turned a potential humanitarian disaster into a demonstration of what proper medical care could accomplish. After the war, Kyle established the Coalition Medical Training Institute. His curriculum became standard for all military medical personnel across the galaxy. The institute's motto, carved in human script above the main entrance, translated simply, "Everyone matters." Ashitar turned off the recording device and looked at the medical equipment surrounding his chair. Human-designed monitors tracked his vital signs. Human-developed medications managed his pain. Human medical philosophy had saved his life a dozen times over. Outside his window, he could see the lights of a hospital ship treating wounded veterans from 6 different species. Human doctors worked alongside alien colleagues, sharing techniques and knowledge without regard for military rank or species origin. Kyle had been right. In the end, medicine wasn't about following protocols or calculating resource allocation. It was about the simple recognition that suffering demanded response, that pain required healing, and that every life had value beyond tactical considerations. The humans had taught the galaxy that the strength to heal was often more important than the power to destroy. Rain streaked down the medical bay windows as Ashitar prepared for another recording session. His nephew's flight helmet sat on the desk beside him, still bearing scorch marks from their final battle together. He touched the worn metal gently before activating the device. Personal log, Cycle 847 post-war, Entry 5. Today I remember the Nexus Gateway, and the boy who learned to fly like a human. The Nexus Gateway was the most important strategic position in the sector, a massive space station built around natural gravitational anomalies that allowed rapid travel between distant star systems. Whoever controlled the gateway controlled movement across half the galaxy. When the swarm massed their largest fleet for an assault on the station, Coalition Command assembled every available ship for its defense. Ashtar found himself commanding a mixed squadron of human and alien pilots, the first integrated unit of its kind. His nephew Shen Dai had requested assignment to the unit specifically to serve under human training. The young Rilken was brilliant, fearless, and completely convinced that traditional Coalition flight doctrine was outdated. "Uncle," he had said during their first meeting aboard the command ship, "I want to learn from the humans. Their pilots achieve impossible results with inferior equipment." Ashitar had been skeptical. "Human tactics are chaotic and emotional. They lack proper formation discipline." "Exactly," Shendai grinned, showing his sharp teeth. That's why they win. The human squadron leader was a veteran pilot named Jack who flew a battered fighter held together with spare parts and stubborn determination. His wingman was a cheerful woman called Amy, who treated combat like an elaborate game. They welcomed the alien pilots with casual friendliness that violated every protocol Ashitar knew about military hierarchy. Forget the rank structure, Jack told the mixed squadron during their first briefing. Up there, we're all just pilots trying to stay alive and protect each other. Human Rilkins and Tarian doesn't matter. We fly together, we fight together, we come home together. The cultural clash was immediate and dramatic. Coalition pilots flew in precise formations with predetermined attack patterns and clear command structures. Human pilots seemed to make up their tactics as they went along, relying on intuition and split-second improvisation. During training exercises, Shendai struggled to adapt to the human style. His precise, calculated maneuvers clashed with the chaotic energy of human flight patterns. After a particularly frustrating practice session, he approached Jack for advice. "I don't understand," Shendai said. "Your attack formations have no mathematical basis. How do you achieve tactical coordination without predetermined patterns?" Jack smiled and pulled up a holographic display of their recent exercise. "Watch this," he said, highlighting the flight paths of different pilots. "See how Amy breaks formation to cover Bill's blind spot? How Sarah adjusts her approach when she sees an opportunity. We don't follow predetermined patterns because battles don't follow predetermined patterns. But how do you coordinate without clear command structure?" "Trust," Jack said simply. "We trust each other to make good decisions. Amy knows I'll cover her if she takes a risk. Sarah knows Bill will adjust his tactics to support her initiative. We fly together so much that we start thinking together." The real test came during the battle itself. The swarm fleet that attacked the Nexus Gateway was unlike anything the Coalition had faced before. New bioship designs with adaptive armor that could adjust to different weapon types, coordinated attack patterns that shifted in real time based on defensive responses, tactical algorithms that seemed to learn from each exchange. Traditional Coalition tactics failed completely. Predetermined attack formations were anticipated and countered before they could be executed. Standard weapon loadouts proved ineffective against adaptive armor. Command structures broke down as bioships targeted communication arrays. "All squadrons, break formation," Jack ordered as the first wave of Coalition fighters was decimated. "Freelance tactics, adjust to targets of opportunity." Ashitar watched from the command bridge as his mixed squadrons scattered across the battlefield. Individual fighters engaged swarm bioships with improvised tactics and constant adaptation. When traditional weapons failed, human pilot Gary began using his ship's construction tools as improvised weapons. "This is insane," muttered Admiral Kelt from the Draxian command staff. "They have no tactical coherence." "No," Ashitar realized, studying the tactical display. "They have perfect tactical coherence. They're adapting faster than the swarm can respond." The breakthrough came when Engineering Chief Paula coordinated repairs across multiple ship types simultaneously. Her technical knowledge allowed her to hotwire human systems with alien technology, creating hybrid solutions that no single species could have developed alone. "Jack, I can boost your engine output by 15% if you can handle the extra stress." Paula's voice crackled over the comm. "Do it," Jack replied while diving toward a swarm capital ship. "Shendai, your weapons array is compatible with Centaurian targeting systems, patching you through to Lieutenant Corps fire control." Ashitar watched his nephew's fighter suddenly become 3 times more accurate as alien targeting protocols merged with Rilken piloting skills. The young pilot whooped with joy as his enhanced weapons carved through swarm defensive screens, but it was the rescue mission that truly demonstrated human influence on the mixed squadron. When the swarm broke through the station's defensive perimeter, they captured a Coalition transport carrying civilian refugees. Standard doctrine called for writing off the transport and focusing on military objectives. The human pilots had different ideas. "We're going after them," Jack announced. "That's a suicide mission," Admiral Kelt protested. "The transport is already in swarm-controlled space." "Then we better hurry," Amy replied, already turning her fighter toward the captured ship. Shendai followed without hesitation. So did the other alien pilots in the squadron. They had learned something from their human colleagues. Some things were more important than tactical doctrine. The rescue operation violated every rule of space combat. The mixed squadron flew deep into swarm territory using stealth techniques borrowed from 3 different species. They coordinated their attack using hand signals visible through cockpit windows because radio communication would have revealed their position. When they reached the captured transport, they found it being escorted by 6 swarm bioships toward a processing facility. Jack's plan was typically human in its simplicity. Hit hard, grab the transport, and run before the swarm could respond. "Shendai, you're the fastest," Jack said over the short-range comm. "Get behind that transport and cover our approach." "Understood," Shendai replied, pushing his fighter to maximum velocity. The battle was brief and violent. Human pilots used suicide tactics to cripple swarm escorts, while alien pilots provided covering fire with superior weapons technology. Amy rammed her damaged fighter into a bioship's weapon array, ejecting at the last second and trusting her squad mates to pick her up. Shendai found himself flying escort for the rescued transport while fighting off 3 swarm interceptors. His weapons were nearly depleted and his engines were overheating. When a bioship lined up for a killing shot on the civilian vessel, he made a decision that would have been impossible before serving with humans. He rammed his fighter into the swarm ship's engine cluster, destroying both vessels in a brilliant explosion. Ashtar felt his heart stop as he watched his nephew's fighter disappear from the tactical display. The young Rilken who had wanted to learn human tactics had learned the most human lesson of all. Some things were worth dying for. The transport was saved. All 847 civilian refugees reached safety. The mixed squadron had demonstrated that integrated tactics could achieve results impossible for any single species. But the cost was personal for Ashtar. At the memorial service, Jack presented Ashtar with Shenadai's flight helmet. "He flew like one of us," the human pilot said quietly. "Brave, crazy, and absolutely committed to bringing everyone home. We couldn't have asked for a better wingman." Ashitar held the helmet and realized that his nephew had found something precious in his service with humans. A cause larger than personal survival, more important than tactical efficiency. He had died protecting people he barely knew, because that's what his human squad mates had taught him to value. The mixed squadron concept became standard throughout the coalition fleet. Integrated units combining the best characteristics of multiple species proved superior to traditional single-species formations. But more importantly, the cultural exchange changed how alien pilots thought about their duties. Individual sacrifice for collective benefit. Personal bonds transcending species barriers. The radical idea that every life had value beyond strategic calculation. These human concepts spread through the coalition military like a beneficial infection. Ashitar turned off the recording device and placed his nephew's helmet back on the desk. Outside, he could see mixed crews working on the hospital ship, humans and aliens collaborating with the casual familiarity that Shendai had found so appealing. The young Rilken had wanted to learn how humans achieved impossible results. In the end, he had learned that the impossible became achievable when you cared more about others than yourself. The final recording session began as dawn broke across the medical ship's observation deck. Ashtar sat in the same chair where he had started this journey through memory, but everything felt different now. The weight of remembrance had lifted, replaced by something lighter but no less profound. He activated the device one last time. Personal log, cycle 847 post-war, final entry. Today I close the circle and speak of endings that became beginnings. 3 years had passed since the swarm's defeat. 3 years since the last bioship fell burning from alien skies. The galaxy was at peace for the first time in a generation, but peace looked nothing like what anyone had expected. The changes began small. Coalition medical protocols now required treatment of enemy wounded. Military academies taught courses on psychological warfare and environmental adaptation. Command structures became more flexible, allowing for initiative and improvisation at lower levels. But the real transformation was deeper, more fundamental. Across the galaxy, species that had maintained strict boundaries for millennia were learning to work together, not just in military alliances or trade agreements, but in the daily business of living. Ashitar's current assignment exemplified the change. The new Harmony Rehabilitation Center treated war veterans from 17 different species using therapeutic techniques developed by human psychologist Dr. Fields. The facility's diverse staff worked together with an ease that would have been impossible before the war. Trauma transcends species. Dr. Fields had explained during Ashitar's first session. Pain is universal. Fear speaks the same language everywhere, but so does healing, if we're willing to learn from each other. The human approach to mental health care was as revolutionary as their military tactics. Instead of simply managing symptoms or medicating problems away, they focused on understanding root causes and building emotional resilience. Veterans learned to process their experiences through art, storytelling, and community support. Ashitar found himself facilitating discussion groups where former enemies shared their war stories. Swarm drones, their hive mind connections severed but their individual consciousness intact, struggled to understand concepts like personal choice and emotional autonomy. Coalition veterans helped them navigate the confusing world of independent thought. I was part of something larger, explained a former drone named Echo during one session. Now I am just myself, alone with my thoughts. It is frightening but also wonderful. The transformation of the drones represented perhaps the greatest victory of human influence. Instead of executing captured swarm forces, as traditional military doctrine demanded, human medical officers had studied ways to separate individual consciousness from the collective network. Thousands of former enemies were learning to live as independent beings. Some found work in rehabilitation centers, their unique perspective valuable for treating other veterans. Others joined exploration teams heading to former swarm worlds, helping to establish new colonies built on cooperation rather than conquest. A few even enrolled in coalition military academies, their biological adaptations useful for specialized missions. The memorial wall in the center's main corridor told the story of the war's cost. Thousands of names covered the black stone surface, each one representing a life lost in the fighting. Human names were intermixed with alien, ones in a display that would have been unthinkable before the war, but it was the memorial's inscription that truly captured humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. Written in dozens of languages, the same message appeared again and again. They gave their lives so others might choose how to live theirs. Choice. That simple human concept had revolutionized everything. Before the war, most species lived within rigid social structures that determined individual roles and behaviors. The idea that personal decisions could override biological programming or cultural expectations was alien to most galactic civilizations. Humans brought the radical notion that every being had the right to determine their own path. Colony ships now departed regularly for former swarm worlds. Mixed crews of humans and aliens worked together to establish new settlements based on voluntary cooperation rather than species-based hierarchies. Children grew up speaking multiple languages and learning customs from different cultures. Ashitar often watched these ships departing from the center's observation deck. Each vessel represented hope for a future that no single species could have imagined alone. Human engineering combined with Zentorian manufacturing. Rilken navigation systems enhanced by Draxian computational power. Swarm biological adaptation techniques used for terraforming and agriculture. The integration wasn't always smooth. Cultural misunderstandings still caused conflicts. Some species resisted the changes, preferring traditional isolation to uncertain cooperation. Fear and prejudice didn't disappear overnight, but the momentum was unstoppable. A generation of beings had learned that differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. Young people across the galaxy grew up with friends from other species, learned from teachers of different backgrounds, and dreamed of possibilities their parents couldn't imagine. Yesterday, a young human cadet had visited the center as part of her military training. She wanted to understand the war that had shaped the galaxy before her birth. Ashtar found himself walking with her through the memorial garden, explaining the cost of the victories commemorated in stone and metal. What made the difference? She asked. Why did humans succeed where other species failed? Ashtar considered the question carefully. It was one he had asked himself countless times during these recordings. Your species brought something new to the galaxy, he said finally. The idea that every individual life has value beyond strategic calculation. But that seems obvious, the cadet replied. Don't all civilizations believe that? No, Ashitar said gently. Most species, including mine, valued collective survival over individual welfare. We calculated acceptable losses and moved on. Humans refused to accept that any loss was acceptable if it could be prevented. They paused before a sculpture depicting humans and aliens working together to rebuild a destroyed city. The artist had captured something essential about post-war civilization. The recognition that cooperation, created possibilities impossible for any single group. Your ancestors changed how we think about warfare, medicine, leadership, and social organization, Ashtar continued. But most importantly, they changed how we think about each other. Before humans, most species saw aliens as either useful allies or dangerous enemies. Humans saw potential family. The cadet was quiet for a moment, studying the memorial wall. My instructor says the war could have been won using traditional tactics, just with higher casualties. Perhaps, Ashitar agreed. But victory isn't just about defeating enemies. It's about building something better from the aftermath. Your species taught us that how you win matters as much as whether you win. That evening, Ashitar completed his final recording in the observation lounge. Through the transparent walls, he could see stars that once marked battlefields where species learned to trust each other. Distant lights marked worlds where former enemies now worked together to build new homes. The swarm war ended 3 years ago, he said to the recording device. But the human war for the soul of galactic civilization continues every day. Every time someone chooses cooperation over competition, healing over revenge, hope over fear, humanity wins another victory. He paused, considering his final words. I began these recordings to document the shocking tactics humans used during the war. I end them understanding that the most shocking thing about humans was never their weapons or strategies. It was their absolute refusal to accept that some beings matter more than others. The recording device powered down with a soft click. Ashtar sat in the darkness, surrounded by stars and memories, thinking about tomorrow. Somewhere out there, human ships were exploring new worlds. Former enemies were learning to be friends. Children were growing up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. The war was over. The peace had just begun. And in that peace, humanity's greatest victory was not the defeat of the swarm, but the transformation of defeat into hope, enemies into allies, and strangers into family. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.